I'm Maggie. I'm a licensed clinical psychotherapist with degrees in psychology, theology, and marriage and family therapy, a national certification in dialectical behavioral therapy, and a national certification in integrative mental health. In this video, I'm not looking to diagnose anyone. I'm only willing to offer insight into situations like these. Hello, hello, happy Sunday. Welcome to part 2 of MAGA Dems, because they get into each other. Just ask Bill and Trump. Sorry, I couldn't help it. Anyway, we're going into part 2. Now, in part 1, there's a lot of history. We have to really explain what MAGA is, because it's not just Make America Great Again. To be able to show these Dems are on the same side as the Republicans, honestly. So, sorry, I had all these little notifications popping up. Okay, so we're going to get into part 2. We're still in the history because we got to talk about Reagan. We got to talk about Heritage Foundation because it rears its ugly head. And we even got to talk about what happened before Reagan that got us to where we're going. I want to say hi to Leon in the chat and Dietrich. Thank you for being here. I am going through a little bit of a shadow ban on all my social media platforms. So shout out to the replay gang, who's probably going to include the rest of my live tribe, which is the best live tribe on YouTube. So without further ado, let me bring up Adrian. There you are.
Hey, how's everybody doing?
All right, so I still have some images that we can look at to keep us on track. So the first thing that we're going to talk about is the Heritage Foundation, because that is the architect of Reaganism.
Mm-hmm.
So the Heritage Foundation was founded in 1973, which is right at the end of the Vietnam War. The founders are Paul Weyrich, which you might recognize his name, Edwin Fulner, and Joseph Coors. You might recognize that name of Coors Brewing Company. They are the founders of the Heritage Foundation. So their mission, I'm sorry.
I was saying right. Agreeing with.
Yeah. So their mission is to create a conservative counter-establishment. That's why they were created. And they wanted to permanently shift U.S. policy right through that Overton window, which we kind of mentioned last time. They wanted a ready-made legislation. They wanted to have the white papers ready. They wanted to have the ideological talking points. And my gosh, if you're on social media, you hear those ideological talking points. It's like no matter what you say, they bring out a talking point and they use them in order, and it doesn't. You could be talking about anything, and somebody will say, "Read your Bible," or what about Chicago, or it's like they just throw them out like they own you. So recently, as an example, put a comment up on Facebook responding to somebody else, and I literally listed a set of like maybe 10 biblical verses, chapter and verse, and then quoted Gospels where Jesus said certain things, quoted Jesus. And I kid you not, somebody responded to me with, "Read your Bible." Where do you think all of that came from?
Because who cares what the facts are, right? I have my talking points, and that's all that matters.
Right, and I'm going to use them in order, right? So, then the next thing they bring out is, the homophobia, right?
Well, I'm surprised that they didn't tell you about how more Black fathers need to be in the home.
Well,
no matter what the topic was that you were talking about, by the way,
Excuse me. Well, the interesting thing is then they came to my page to stalk me and was pulling up pictures from 4 years ago, making comments on posts from a year ago. And one of those posts had something to do with, it was mostly about how the Bible's been changed, but, there's a comment about how, Jesus was a brown man. He didn't look like Kenny Loggins, right? And so she puts on there something about this being appalling. So, so I said, "Prove it." And her response to prove it was, "Read your Bible." And I literally was going through the history of every iteration of the Bible. with years, numbers, dates, and that's not my strong suit. So I did a lot of work on that, and then, read your Bible. Okay. So maybe this is why actually I was on the
Because in
shadow.
those arguments, it's I'm going to throw out some sort of talking point, and then I expect you to do all of the research for me, all the stuff
Yeah,
that I should have researched prior to telling you some nonsense about, in this case, reading your Bible.
right. Right. And so it's like she had to go backwards because since I already posted up all of the receipts, like all the
Mhm.
facts, all the research, everything was there. She's like, no, my comment number one is read your Bible. And then I go into homophobia. And then I go into racism. And then, it's like follow the lines. But this kind of thing is where it came from. It came from Heritage giving people talking points to
Right.
argue about. So one of the first things that they came up with was the mandate for leadership. So this was in 1980. This is a precursor to Project 2025. Okay, so the
Mhm.
mandate for leadership comes out in 1980. Hi, Kevin. Thanks for being here. So before Reagan even took office, Heritage delivered a 1,000-page policy manual to his transition team so that as he transitioned, he could already be working on these things that Heritage wanted to deliver, right?
Right.
They wanted a full restructuring, right? Because again, this is the end of the Vietnam War. We have the hippies and civil rights, and we have all these people who are battling for anti-war equality, really shining a light on white supremacy and battling against, Christianity being the religion of the United States. There was a lot going on. So they wanted a full restructure um, toward privatizing to rich people. We've seen that. Deregulation, military expansion, the rollback of civil rights enforcement, and a Christian nationalist social policy. So we hear this in Project 2025 and also in what's happening now. So for Reagan, he adopted about 2/3 of Heritage recommendations within the first year. So at this point, Heritage is dictating how the
Mhm.
government works, right? They became the policy arm of the Reagan party.
Now, this is 1980 that you're speaking of, um, and again, a lot of people aren't aware of what was on the Libertarian ticket during that election, because we're talking about the Heritage Foundation. Again, to your point, that you made a moment ago, you can't talk about the Heritage Foundation without talking about the Koch brothers. Well,
Mhm.
David Koch was the vice presidential candidate on the Libertarian ticket during that election. And what was one of his key pieces of his platform? The abolishment of the uh, educational department. Right. So
Mm.
now we're seeing both of those lines kind of converging to now. And so you had, you know, light MAGA with
Diet MAGA.
diet MAGA, yeah, with Ronald Reagan. And he was bad enough as it was, right? And then you had even more hardcore proto MAGA, excuse me, that was coming from the libertarian side.
Mhm. So the Heritage Foundation was the brain trust behind Reaganomics and moral majority governance. This is where moral majority started coming
Hmm.
out.
So the
So,
evangelicals.
yeah. So Heritage, bankrolled by the Kochs, right? The Bradley Foundation, Scaife Corporation, Coors, okay? But they were also bankrolled and still are bankrolled by defense contractors. And then there are religious right mega donors, right? Like the DeVos family. So the agenda was fusing economic libertarianism, which is what you were talking about, with social authoritarianism. So that's like the Reagan to Trump conservatism. Like you can see how what they wanted is now enacted.
Hmm.
So they built these networks. They built the Federalist Society for judicial control. So in the Federalist Society, these are judges. And this is how to get judicial control. ALEC, which is the American Legislative Exchange Council, right? What they do is they draft the model conservative laws for states. So as soon as they want a state to do something, they give them the draft law so that it's like, oh, hey, you don't have to reinvent the wheel. Here's the law, just enact it. And
Hmm.
then, then they built Project 2025. So Project 2025, came out in 2023. But before we get into that, I wanted to talk a little bit how the 1973 to the 1980 timeframe, so right before we get into Reagan, because the Heritage Foundation was created during Nixon's collapse. So right as Watergate was going on, social movements were still gaining ground. So Paul Weyrich and Edwin Fulner saw that the kind of the old guard Republican model was not going to survive against civil rights and feminism and anti-war and all these things that people were fighting for. So they designed the Heritage Foundation to institutionalize the counter revolution, right? A permanent stop to the New Deal, the Great Society, all of those. We're going to institutionalize counter revolution and then create this policy continuity across administrations. So one person does this, like it's playing the long game. They're
Right.
creating the steps and the plans to eventually, they're planning, maybe even up to 100 years in advance, right? So they're playing the long game, so they have this policy continuity, and then they train and embed operatives into universities, media, government pipelines, all those kind of things. You will find all these heritage members, and if their bio doesn't say they're a heritage member, it will say that they helped author Project 2025, or they're in the Federalist Society, or they're in ALEC, these sort of sister societies. So, they realize you don't have to win every election, right? You just have to ensure that every winner is going along with your playbook. Even when they're like, oh, the Republicans are so bad and we got to do this, that, and the third, but then they're being paid to do things that continue to promote what they're promoting. And so that leads me to somebody called Lee Atwater, which you know way more about Lee Atwater than me, other than he's kind of smarmy. Um,
Yeah.
so I was going to let you take over with Lee Atwater.
Well, I think the main thing to consider when we're talking about Lee Atwater was just what you mentioned a moment ago. Is he's kind of a trash human being. No, that's my opinion. Don't beat up on Maggie for what I think, but he was just a trash human being. Most notably in my opinion, for his hot mic moment. Uh, during the 1980 election. Um, I don't know. Maybe while I'm talking about that, you can look it up, Maggie. I don't know if there's any way for you to find that audio, um, because it's really telling, and it kind of gives you a sneak peek behind the curtain, um, of how they were going to use words, to uh, to manipulate you. Even today, the same thing is still going on. I think especially in the Black community, you hear a lot, folks talking about, kind of weasel words, or uh, red herrings, or coded speech, um, and we know what those words mean. We know why they're being said. Um, and I'm rambling on purpose there a little bit because it's really important to hear just how abstract a language they were trying to use in order to point towards policies or conditions that were going to hurt, especially at that time, uh, black folks worse than anyone else. You having any luck there?
Well, the only thing I'm finding is the 1981 interview on the Southern strategy.
Yeah. Does it say anything about hot mic?
No. And I even put in hot mic. So,
Let me see if I
Leon.
can find it for us.
Well, Leon is so good at finding these
Hmm.
things quickly. Yeah, here's an interview with Connie Chung. Leon, if you are still in here, can you see if you can find that? He might even already have it, like he knows exactly where it's at because he's such a researcher. And hi,
Yeah.
Chef Mike. Thanks for being here.
But while we're still looking for that, Lee Atwater was a chief strategist under Reagan, but he got a start, again under Nixon. And I know that in our conversations, not on YouTube between you and I, I'm always harping on what happened between 1968 to 1972. Right, those are important years. And during that period of time when Nixon was coming on as president, who was in his camp? Lee Atwater. And again, it's important to continue to hammer down on that because that was such a fork in the road period of time for America. We could have gone with either the um, policy recommendations of the Kerner Commission, or we did the opposite, which was Nixon running on opposing all of that stuff and getting into this kind of proto MAGA movement. Of course, it wasn't called that at that time, but it all leads us to where we are today.
Right. And, we talked about in the first episode that MAGA, Make America Great Again, was originally a Reagan campaign slogan,
Hmm.
and Trump revived it.
But even
Kevin,
to say "Make America Great Again," we then have to um, kind of investigate. Well, what was America, and at what period of time were we talking about? And again, coded speech. Everybody knew what he was talking about.
well, yeah, because we're coming right off of civil rights, right?
Hmm.
So if you're saying make America great again, you're talking about going back in time.
Right.
Um, Kevin, I see your comment. I don't know much about that, so I would have to look into it. But also, my parents and my auntie were hippies, actual hippies, long hair and all. Auntie is still a hippie. um, so, that's just something I haven't looked into. Chris Green, thanks for being here. He says no such thing as a MAGA Dem, just as there's no such thing as a moral Zionist. I think maybe by the time we get done with all this information, you'll see what we're talking about. This kind of falls into the same category of um, left wing, right wing, same chicken, you know,
Right.
two sides of the same coin kind of thing. Leon, there he is. Can you find the hot mic moment of Lee Atwater? What other
I
details
found
can
it.
you put in there? Oh, you
I
got
found
it?
it.
Oh,
Hmm.
okay. Thank you, Leon, but don't go too far because Leon's great about getting me links or stuff. He puts it in the Patreon. So if anybody wants just tons of great information, you can join my Patreon. There are free options to be a member. I have free options. You can choose a paid membership if you want to support the channel, but you don't have to. It's totally fine. Chris Green says the death of public education in America began long before the Koch brothers. The federal government bailed on financing public education decades ago. Oh, and I've talked about on this channel before about the Department of Education was a money grab from the beginning. The first president of the United States Board of Education, Rothschild, said, I don't want a nation of thinkers, I want a nation of workers. And that's why he took over education. So education was dead before it started. Okay, so you've got the link to the hot mic moment. You want me to play it?
Yeah, if you didn't mind.
Where have you sent it to?
I put it in the studio chat. You see it?
There we go. I so rarely go into the private chat. All right, let me get this queued up. All right. Okay. There's kind of an intro here, so give
Okay.
me 1 second.
Here's how I would approach that issue as a statistician or a political science, or no, as a psychologist, which I'm not, is how abstract you handle the race thing. In other words, you start out, and now y'all aren't quoting me on this. All right, I won't do it. You start out in 1954 by saying nigger, nigger, nigger. By 1968, you can't say nigger. That hurts your backfire. So you say stuff like forced busing, states' rights, and all that stuff. And you're getting so abstract now. You're talking about cutting taxes and all of these things you're talking about are totally economic things. And the byproduct of them is blacks get hurt worse than whites. And subconsciously, maybe that is part of it. I'm not saying that, but I'm saying that if it is getting that abstract and that coded, that we're doing away with the racial problem one way or the other. You follow me? Because obviously sitting around saying we want to cut taxes, we want to cut this, and we want is much more abstract than even the busing thing, and a hell of a lot more abstract than nigger nigger, you know.
Should think about that.
And again, when we're talking about language, there was under the Nixon administration, one of the, I guess, proposals that came out of the Moynihan report was that there be a cooling down on the conversations around race. One of those, if we just don't talk about it, it'll go away type of things. And we understand that today as, they said it expressly, a period of benign neglect. So how do you get around? Because again, Atwater right there was talking about the race issue.
Mm-hmm.
Right. So how do we get around it? Well, we call it different things. It's forced busing. It's, don't tax me, bro. That kind of thing, instead of tackling it directly. And now we're seeing it at its logical end, which is, going back and attacking, school boards and stuffing them full of, you know, MAGA, people, to just strike things out of the history book, make it illegal, or there's punitive damages, or I'm probably using the wrong word. There's consequences for teachers teaching, certain aspects and facets of history that we don't want taught. So now we're seeing, these things at its logical end.
Mm-hmm.
And make no mistake, this Atwater guy was, one of the architects of the Southern strategy. When we
Right.
talk about what was it, Willie Horton incident, that helped Bush Sr. become president.
Mm-hmm.
Well, you're looking at the architect, behind that type of stuff. And to circle back around to I think it was Chris was saying that there's no such thing as MAGA Dems. We're not talking about Democratic people pledging MAGA, but we're talking about some of the actions of Democrats that fell right in line with, and still do today, fall in line with MAGA practitioners or early MAGA practitioners, such as Joe Biden during his sentencing disparities campaign and his 94 crime bill. He was seen to the right. He was seen as being to the right of Ronald Reagan during that period of time.
He
So,
was also a
again,
proponent of segregation prior to that.
absolutely, absolutely. And, palled around with the chief segregationalist of his time,
Mm-hmm.
Senator Byrd, and God, I can never, Strom Thurmond, God, his name always escapes me. These
Mm-hmm.
were his mentors. So, again, he's not going to put on a red hat necessarily, but, you know, uh, it's a situation of being able to judge somebody by the company that they keep and the things that they do, not necessarily only the things that they say.
Right. It's the actions, because, Obama did some things that are why we are here today.
Mm-hmm.
Well, actually, it's not necessarily that he did some things, it's that he didn't do a few things that
Sure.
he could have done. And I'm not saying he's MAGA, but just as an example, Clinton did things. There are certain things that people are doing while they're saying, MAGA is terrible, awful, nasty, and then they're doing things that promotes and pushes this agenda along just fine.
Right. Right.
Kind of like, AIPAC's got everybody in their pocket. So if
Right.
you try to tell me that Heritage doesn't have contacts and operatives in the Democrat Party, I won't believe you.
Yeah, you couldn't tell me that Joe Manchin and Kristen Sinema, aren't. I mean, if there was a such thing as a card carrying MAGA Democrat, then they would be it.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. So I put up a picture of the Overton window just to show, like, Heritage Foundation, they wanted to move the Overton window as far as possible to the right so that somebody who was seen as a moderate before could now be called a radical. So say, somebody just saying, equal rights. I mean, look at DEI, right? Diversity, equity, inclusion. It's including everybody. Everybody gets a shot, right? The actual hiring is on merit, but everybody gets a shot to apply for that job, right? And that became unconstitutional because we are so far along. Like, me just saying, people should just leave LGBTQ people alone and let them live their lives and, quit using them as religious excuses for things, then, I'm called radical. Or
Mm-hmm.
I'm a proponent of equal rights, equal access. I'm a therapist. I work with disabled people, mentally ill people, people of every socioeconomic of standard. I work with everyone of every ethnicity and creed and religion. And I just, equality, right? Just equal access to everything. And I am considered a radical just by
Mm-hmm.
doing that because it has shifted so far. And so I'm constantly, I guess, accused of being a Democrat. And I am not. I am of the belief left wing, right wing, same bird. I'm not a Democrat either. I'm a wholehearted independent. I used to be a registered Democrat. I am not anymore. Okay. So Leon says MAGA Dems are bulldog Democrats, aka South Fabian Socialist, aka Nation Rights for Whites. Okay. So, now we're moving into Trump's MAGA era. which now we're like solidifying all the things that have been put in place, all the steps that have been moving towards where we need to be. And it's going to be his second presidency where everything needs to be solidified. So, the hope always was he could run, back to back. He didn't, but he got his second presidency. So, Heritage is still in the game, right? So, we start with criminalizing homelessness, right? The executive order, we've got that. The states that are influenced by MAGA policies like Florida, Texas, Tennessee, the hardest, proposed or created even more laws about sleeping outdoors, about encampments, or even fine charities for feeding the homeless.
Mm.
Like they have literally criminalized being homeless so they can get you in jail. They want you in prison. That's where they want you. So poverty itself is criminal conduct. That's all it is. Then after the 2020 BLM uprisings and protests, which we're not going to get into BLM, but just after those, over 100 anti-protest bills were proposed nationwide. Some of them allowing drivers to run over protesters who are blocking the road. So that is kind of a continuation of the COINTELPRO kind of logic, punish mobilization kind of stuff. Then targeting autonomous cities, right? So the MAGA rhetoric labels Democratic run or majority minority cities as crime-ridden, a dump, failed, un-American. They're going to send in the National Guard because it's a war zone, and that they're justifying federal intervention. And the Supreme Court, which got stacked before, has said that we don't have a system of checks and balances anymore as the Constitution put up. The president is the final say-so of everything, and there is no check or balance for him. So he's able to do that, and he's doing that with the Department of War now. So then they label Antifa as a terrorist threat, which y'all know what Antifa is, right? It's anti-stay with me, anti-fascism, right?
Right.
So if you see anti-fascism as a terrorist threat, what does that say about your regime?
That your regime is fascist.
Right. Because if you're a threat to me and you're anti-fascist, that must mean I'm fascist because you're anti-fascist. You're my enemy, right?
Right.
And the funniest part is Antifa is not an organization. And so when what's her name was saying that they caught the founder of Antifa's girlfriend and they're going to catch him, that was hilarious to me anyway. Now, I know some people are going to believe that, but number one, Antifa is not a formalized organization. And number two, the Antifa movement started in Nazi Germany. So if you found the girlfriend of the founder of Antifa, she is old as hell.
She's 100 years old now.
Yeah, and so the guy who found is probably long dead. But they want to put out this rhetoric.
Yeah, I wanted to circle back around to something real quick, if you don't mind me doing so.
Sure.
When you're talking about the period around BLM and how they released new laws on what you can do to protesters, again, this is about the Democrats. I want to know, okay, so what was the other side doing? In 2016, there was a leaked memo from the DCCC. And it advised candidates, and this is what it says, as I'm reading it here, it advised candidates on how to interact with Black Lives Matter activists, suggesting they, quote, not offer support for specific policy positions during meetings. Okay. The memo was criticized by BLM organizers as, quote, placating response that focused on optics rather than concrete support for their demands to value Black lives and end anti-Black racism. Okay. So,
Right.
Again, just kind of take a picture with them, but don't offer any real support, just play. palliative care.
Right. It's sort of like, when they do the let's all go to the barber shop and talk to the people,
Right.
it's just more performative stuff. And you know what I say the Dems are always doing, feckless hand wringing, right? They
Right.
don't ever do anything. They get
Right.
elected because they are the lesser of two evils.
Right.
Their platforms are always, well, my opponent is evil. Like, look at Kamala. How long did it take her to even come up with a policy platform? Because she
Hmm.
was running on Trump is evil. And then when the Republicans are doing these things that they pretend not to like, they're just, oh my God, it's so terrible. I can't believe. And can you imagine? And stopping somebody in the hallway and going, the president just looks like a crazy man. But are they doing anything? No, no. Now, the government got shut down because they wouldn't do what they were going to do. But then we had 8 MAGA Dems who come in and reopen the government.
Right. And give up all the leverage that they had over the process, and really kind of took the wind out of the sails of all those election wins that were just had just a couple weeks
Yeah,
ago.
right, right. So Democratic administrators have implemented heritage ideas. They just put them under new labels so that the heritage horizon always stays in place. They're always moving towards this certain goal. So they only need to kind of soften a tone or insert some sort of social justice rhetoric to make it sound democratic, but
Well,
they've moved things along for us to get to where they are now.
and I think that was the whole reason for having the Heritage Foundation, because again, remember that one of the chief funders, at least early on, of the Heritage Foundation was Mr. Coors Sr., who again was also a part of the John Birch Society, which the John Birch Society was specifically against the civil rights movement and all the other social justice changes that were happening, excuse me, in the 50s and early 60s. But as they sought to try to find a kinder, gentler way to get the same thing accomplished, they started to distance themselves from the John Birch Society, and then created the Heritage Foundation. These are still the same people, right? In a lot of ways, but they just found different language to try to get their aims and goals accomplished.
Mhm. So in looking at where we are now with Project 2025, when we first heard about Project 2025 and that, it was going to be given to Trump, and Trump's like, never heard of him. And then he hired a bunch of them. And then later called somebody of Project 2025 fame, but he never heard of it.
Mhm.
Anyway, he's implemented a lot of it. And Adrian is going to share a link for a tracker. So, Adrian, do you have like an up to date where we're at with what percentage of Project 2025 has Trump enacted?
Yeah, I am Grace under fire right now because my my laptop just gave out. So
Okay.
I'm pulling up my phone right now.
Well, I was going
One
to
of
say, while
the
you're
many phones
doing
that I have.
that, I can talk about right wing policy and with left wing branding.
Okay.
Okay. So they do some things, right, to keep this going. Um, so they have policy infrastructure, right? So Heritage creates these plug and play templates, like I was talking about, like with the state laws. They've created all these things. Now, even Project 2025 was 100 or 200 people in this think tank to put it together, right? And so they have tons of resources to make these plug and play legislation, right? So lawmakers of either party can use those templates to appear really efficient. well, I'm going to do something about it. And then they just change the wording, right? And then through, news outlets, right, they frame policy dissent as anti-American, right? So anybody who's a moderate, who's a centrist, right, may want to conform. Then they have this huge donor web, like they've got all the money, right? They have foundations like Bradley, Koch, DeVos, Scaife, and Mercer donate to both the centrist and conservative politicians. So they're, constantly moving people over, right? It's patronage that they disguise as libertarianism or bipartisanship, but they are supporting that Heritage Foundation movement. Okay, you just put it in the link.
Yeah,
You
I had to change up where I could actually put it. So if you wanted to grab that and maybe put it up, and you can see it's about 48% right now, um, of the aims and goals of Project 2025 they've accomplished.
Can you put it in the private chat? Because here on StreamYard, I can't
Mhm.
pull off of the regular comments, but I can off the private one. I'm sorry.
Yeah, it's no problem. I'll figure this out. Just give me a couple of moments.
Okay. So then while we're doing that, they have this think tank overlap, right? So heritage staff circulate into other moderate institutions like AEI, Brookings, CSIS, right? Ensuring that their respectable experts echo the same core doctrines, right? Deregulation, defense expansion, privatization, and Judeo-Christian exceptionalism. That's what they're on, right? And they need the judiciary capture, right? Their sister network, the Federalist Society, which I told you about, trains and then places judges across decades. Long game, remember, long game, making ideological rollback almost irreversible. Look where we're at with the Supreme Court. It is not balanced. No matter which side of the aisle that you're on, you have to admit that the Supreme Court is not balanced. Okay, here, let me bring up. Okay, once I get this pulled up, you'll have to tell me like where you want me to go.
Okay.
There we go.
Sorry, I have to get rid of a couple things here to
No, you're
get my
fine.
audio
You right
back.
click start tracking. So
You
there's
can, but it says, I think at the very top of
oh
it,
yeah.
exactly what's going on.
Yeah, so he's implemented already 48% of
Mhm.
Project 2025.
Right.
They're tracking 319 objectives, 1,160 days, 20 hours, 10 minutes, and 23 seconds till the end of his term, right?
Mhm.
And so you guys can take that link, right, and go through here. Okay, so progress by agency,
There
USA,
you go.
100%,
100%. Mm-hmm.
right? CFTC, that's the commodities futures, 100%. Corporation for Public Broadcasting, 100%, which, that only objective was get rid of it. So they did it. 13 objectives for the White House, they're at 92% finished.
Mm-hmm.
Wild.
Yeah. And
Department
as
of
you
State.
continue to drill down on that website and scroll down, it'll go into even more detail, into education and things like that. So,
Right. But just, even looking at those agencies is
Mhm.
crazy. And then, here, Department of Justice, the EPA, Homeland Security. Is there anything under? Overall, I get that it's 48%, but I'm looking in these top ones, there's nothing under. Oh, there we go. halfway there, but it's so close. Department of Education's 46%, Department of Energy 45, Department of Commerce 45, Treasury 40, Health and Human Services, they're going towards those. I can tell you that right now. The
Mhm.
way that they're going after the homeless populations and
And
insurance.
I think that they're looking for red meat right now. Okay, because everybody is like, okay, well that's cute, but how about release those Epstein files,
Yeah,
right? And the more that the unwashed masses ask for the Epstein files, the more chaff, the more diversions, that are thrown out. And again, circling back to the Dems, the question is, okay, so what are you going to do about it, right?
right.
And
And they're going to affect the family.
right, with Schumer, with Hakeem Jeffries, I'm just going to tell you, I'm going to skip to my end game here. We're going to get to 2028, and they're going to come out and they're going to say, just vote for us, so that way we aren't those guys. Well, what policies are you going to offer us? Well, I mean, nothing, but
But we're
vote for
not
me.
them.
But we're not them, right? And if that's the only thing that we end up voting for, then we end up getting absolutely nothing as we go forward. Be more incrementalism. You're going to piss off more people, and then there's going to be some new MAGA candidate that comes along in another 4 years after that, and things get even worse.
Listen, 10 years ago, Kamala Harris would have been seen as a conservative Republican candidate.
Yeah. They because of the Overton window shift, Reagan is actually a moderate Democrat.
Yeah. When, he's the precursor to everything that's happening,
Mhm. Exactly. Again, we elected the guy to president who was to the right of Ronald Reagan in the 80s, in Joe Biden.
Mhm. It surprised me because I'm like, Kamala was a prosecutor. She
Hmm.
put moms in jail.
Hmm.
Like,
For truancy.
and
For
she
truancy.
right, and she's the Democrat nominee,
Hmm.
like, at this point, Bernie Sanders looks radical when he's a moderate.
Hmm.
He's more central,
And
or
she
even
labeled herself. She labeled herself as the top cop in California. Again, codified words. Because in the 60s, the John Birch Society was talking about how you should support your local police department, keep them independent. Okay. You know,
Mhm,
um, you had, the war on crime and stuff like that that came out of Nixon. You had tough on crime Democrats, like again, Joe Biden and Bill Clinton. So
mhm.
it's all of this signaling that, hey, I'm gonna, keep my foot in the behind of people just like the Republicans will.
Mhm. Wasn't it Hillary that coined the term super predators? Was it Hillary
Yeah.
or Bill?
Hmm.
It's Hillary?
It was both of them. It was both of them at that time, but most famously, Hillary. And talking
Yeah.
about bringing people to heal.
Yeah. People healing like
Yeah.
dogs. So a couple
Right.
comments, Kevin. We are gonna be doing a special on Agenda 2030. That is coming up. That'll be
Hmm.
another special with Adrian. So good call on bringing that up. Leon says Barack Obama calls this Supreme Court situation on purpose. I think you meant caused because I agree. We've talked about that before.
Yeah.
And Ruth Bader Ginsburg, because she should have retired early enough that a Democrat could have replaced her with a moderate or, even more liberal judge. But
Yeah.
she
Don't get
didn't.
me started on them. But again, why didn't she? She
Yeah, like
didn't
wake
do it
up.
because she didn't do it because she wanted her replacement to be selected by the first woman president. So forget just getting the business done, right? It was for these ideological reasons that she didn't retire. And then, lo and behold, because Hillary was actually pushing to run against Donald because she was thinking in her mind that there's no way that she can lose to Donald.
Right. There's no way. Because the platform is I'm not him.
She ends up losing to Donald. Scalia passed, I think, under during Obama's tenure, but he was the reach across the aisle president, so he let these Tea Party Republicans who would never work with him on their best day. He let them convince him not to do a judicial pick. But again, everybody on the Democratic side is thinking that Hillary's going to win this thing, right? And then you get Donald Trump. Ginsburg dies, and then he ends up getting 2 judicial picks in his first tenure.
And then it's that Supreme Court that grants him total immunity.
Yeah.
So Chris said the Clintons turned the Democrats into the corporate servile party they have become. While I agree that the Clintons moved it along, this has been going on for quite a while, because this has, for me, this has a lot to do with the founding of the country, and shortly thereafter in the 1800s, the oligarchs came in because capitalism. So they wanted to do this experimental capitalism and make money any way they could. So then you have things like the Rothschild being the president of the U.S. Department of Education, and then we see that going on over and over and over again, that money buys you position. I mean, look at the appointees now. They are so unqualified. Pete Hegseth, no matter if you like Trump or any of the other stuff, Pete Hegseth is an embarrassment being the head of the Department of War. And he's so unqualified. The highest he got in the military was a major. And which, that's not a nothing, but it definitely should not get you to be the Secretary of the Department of Labor, or I'm sorry, the Department of War.
Mm-hmm.
And he was what, a Fox co-host?
Yeah, he's a talk show host.
And he's wearing the same fake tan and the same hairsprayed hair and can't do a pull-up to save his life, up there talking about how, women got to meet these standards and no more fatties and all this kind of stuff, when his president is a good 150 pounds, 200 pounds overweight and soft as the Stay Puft Marshmallow Man with giant cankles, and he can't do a pull-up. Like, this is where we are now, that money and being a yes man, having your nose fully up the hiney of somebody else, gets you positions of power. As much as they go on and on and on and on about merit-based system, none of these appointees merit their appointment. Look at Kash Patel. Like, nobody meets the criteria except they either have money to get into that position of power, or they're firmly a yes man. Pam Bondi, she's another yes woman, no matter what happens.
I think that's
I would not be shocked if Megyn Kelly doesn't get appointed to something very soon.
Oh yeah, for carrying water for Trump on this whole Epstein thing. You have to carry water for him. But I want to circle back again just a little bit. I think that the Democrats are even more nefarious, because they have this tightrope that they have to walk. How do we virtue signal to moderate Republicans that, hey, nod, nod, wink, wink, we're really on your side too, but we have to keep this big tent, this big coalition together. Again, I'm reminded of then Governor Clinton back during the mid to late 80s in the whole plasma farming scandal. His state was a part of 6 other states in the United States that were selling inmates plasma. and getting them to uh, coercing them to sell plasma because they could get $7 a pint while they're in prison. That's big money for those guys. And that turned into a scandal. Or where was he at when he was doing his whole crime bill tour? Well, or was he campaigning during that period of time? I can't remember. Don't hold me to that part. But the whole photo op at the foot of
I
Stone
think he
Mountain,
was
Georgia.
elected. I think he was
Okay,
elected at the photo op.
yeah. But of all places, you have this. Yeah, and I think that was part of the signing of the crime bill. Again, my memory's a little foggy around that piece of it, but think of the optics. You have this troop of black inmates behind you, and you're signing these documents and doing this show at the seat of power for the Ku Klux Klan, which would be Stone Mountain, Georgia.
Mm-hmm. Well, and I think
That's
the
a
way they
huge.
do it is they sell us this story, this fable, this myth with their feckless hand wringing that, well, they have to acquiesce some things to be able to go to the table because those Republicans are just so mean and they put their foot down and they're not going to move and they won't cooperate and they won't. And
Right.
we got to come together and we got to be bipartisan. So we had to give up this, that, the third, Obamacare, universal health. We have to give it up to come to because we got to come to an agreement because that's how they sell us on this, that
But Maggie,
that's why I call them feckless.
But Maggie, who convinced the United States that Democrats were soft on crime? Lee Atwater.
Oh, geez. Oh, yeah, because
Okay.
that was the start of the law and
That was
order.
the Willie Horton. That was the Willie Horton incident, right? These Democrats are soft on crime, and the next thing you know, your sister's going to get, assaulted or something like that. Um, uh, I mean, and then here come the Democrats to try to rebrand themselves from being this all-inclusive big tent party to now we're tough on crime, and people aren't going to believe it. Nobody's going to be. I mean, if you're going to get Republican or Republican light, most people are going to vote Republican. They're just going to go for the real thing, not this this off-brand plain label Republican.
Right, socialist Republican.
Yeah, and this is where your concept, in my opinion, of MAGA Dems, starts to gain some traction.
Right. I'm going to go through some comments. Chris Green says, it's hard to deny that America has not become a quasi-fascist state accelerated by the Orange Emperor. Totally agree. Kinks is doing it. Leon says, Kamala Harris is not black because my mother-in-law is not black, and I double dare anyone to tell her she is black. I'm not going to tell her, Leon. I don't.
Nope.
I don't tell women what race they are ever. Chris says, this is some of the best commentary I've heard on the recent history of America. Well, thank you so much, Chris. I appreciate that. Leon says, Obama claimed that he wanted Clinton to select the next person. LOL. Clinton. Yeah, and that's kind of what you were talking about. Clinton could have stood next to any woman judge with Obama, and she would have gotten 3% more of the vote. LOL. Yeah, Kevin says it's robber barons writing the lies. Totally agree with you.
That's Alec.
Yeah. Hi, Vincent. Thanks for coming on in. Kevin says AI will most probably take over the government. I mean, they're already using it, weren't they? They were using algorithms to do stuff. You know what I mean? So, there's not a good democratic mechanism left to counter it. We cannot trust that the Dems are going to do anything about this. The Dems are just as culpable for removing any avenue of a third party being able to run for presidency. They are
that's what they did to Bernie.
I'm sorry, what?
That's what they did to Bernie.
Yeah.
And there's, I can't say for certain, but there's a lot of conversation about um, disaffected white progressive males, who just kind of threw their hands up and then went on ahead and voted for Trump, because a lot of them were people who voted for Barack Obama twice. And then they
Mm-hmm.
went along with the populist message that Bernie had. And then, here comes the Clinton machine to, scuttle Bernie.
Mm-hmm.
And now you have the rise of Trump.
Right. Right. So this heritage to MAGA continuum, hopefully you guys have gotten that MAGA isn't just like about the red hats or even being a conservative. It's the alignment with authoritarian, oligarchic, that's a big one, and anti-accountability systems. This is why you got people on both sides fighting the release of the Epstein files, because some of them are in there.
Well,
So
you and I have talked about this before, and I think that we've even talked about it here. These aren't there isn't an enclave for Democrats, right? There's no
no,
part of the city where the Democrats go and live, and where the Democrats go to school, and where the
right.
Democrats, shop for their groceries. All these people live right next to each other. Everybody's going to the same recitals and the same soccer games, right? And they live next to
Hmm.
each other. They grill and they eat, hamburgers with one another. Again, most famously, Antonin Scalia and Ruth Bader Ginsburg used to act in plays together. These people are friends.
Hmm.
And the biggest scam that's ever been perpetrated on the American people is how, and especially Democrats, keep a lid on third party politics.
Hmm.
So, again, if there is a viable third party, then it's a check on the other two, and they got to get their stuff together.
Hmm. And if the candidate is viable, then the Republicans and the Democrats have the money and the resources to go after that person.
Hmm.
Kind of like how APAC can go after whomever they want, and they don't care if the person is Democrat or Republican. This is similar plays. Leon says Bernie Sanders got screwed.
Yeah,
I don't
he did.
agree. We watched it on live TV. Everyone on stage comparing his healthcare plan to Sweden arguments and 20 questions about the transitional community. Everyone attacked him. Yeah. Kevin says the Dems have run out of social leverage. It appears we all can get along. Equality will win the day. I hope so. I hope so.
Yeah.
And something I say because I'm a humanist is that I believe that a majority of Americans are moderates. They are centrists. Um, they don't buy into the MAGA politics and stuff that's going on totally, and they don't buy into pink pussy hats and we don't need men, we just need test tubes kind of rhetoric. Like most everybody is moderate and in the middle and just trying to get along, right? Like they care more about the fact that it's $10 for a dozen eggs, right? That's what they care about. But the loudest people is who we hear, and that just serves to divide us more. So I think as more and more people are just looking around, just get off the internet for a second and look around, you're gonna see that you have way more in common with the people you have proximity to than these oligarchical people who are telling you what to be mad about while building a $300 billion or whatever ballroom.
I hope that the two of you are right. I really do, and I hope that people get that message out of feeling the pain of this administration.
Mhm.
Um, and I find myself kind of at the same time reflecting on what Leon was just talking about with healthcare, and the reason why we don't have socialized medicine or single payer healthcare in this country is because we have yet to reckon with the race issue. The whole reason why we don't have single payer health care in this country is because those who were the architects of it at that time were concerned that Black people would get it. And that if they just didn't offer it, that we'd die off in a few decades. Well, that didn't happen.
Mm-hmm.
And we still don't have socialized healthcare. So, I'm always keen to, think about homogeneity being a factor for whether or not a country gets socialized medicine. We use the Swedish model. I know that there's people other than, prototypical Swedes in Sweden, but that is also some of the rub right now with some of the racial animus in those areas. They feel that those others should go away.
Mm-hmm. So I put up some criteria here, and you guys in the chat, please feel free to. I just realized somebody got banned. So if we can, oh no, okay. It says they're timed out, which I'm okay with people being timed out. I don't want to ban people unless they're totally inappropriate. So those of you with wrenches. Anyway, I put up some criteria here for those of you in the chat, replay gang, Adrian, everybody. These are just some things I came up with that we can apply to politicians. And there's 2 pages of criteria here, or 3 actually, but that we can apply to any politician to see if they're MAGA aligned. Leon says Black people just don't go to the hospital so that we can have government health care. Wait, all poor people don't go there. So there's no real Americans waiting to see their doctors. Yeah, I get that. I mean, and honestly, everything they blame Black people for when it comes to healthcare, like they just keep going to the hospital for their regular general healthcare, that is a poverty issue. Right? Like all Black people don't use the ER for general health care. It is a poverty issue. So if there are Black people who are poor and they don't have access to health care, they have access to an ER. Poor white people do the same thing, and so do poor Hispanic people. They all do the same thing. It's a poverty issue, but Black people get the blame for spiking costs. Leon, I agree, and I think he agrees too, and doesn't ever get mad about it. So some of the criteria, economic policies, so supporting deregulation, corporate tax breaks, prioritizing Wall Street or defense spending over social programs. And don't we see that just on a massive scale right now? Like one of the things that I brought up during this last presidential election was that nobody was talking about homelessness or mental illness. Like nobody was talking about it. It's like, where did that go? They were very pro-business. Everybody was pro-business.
If I'm not mistaken, I think that AIPAC being able to have as much financial influence over our elections is a fairly new thing. But show of ones, if anybody remembers the 2008 election process between Obama and McCain, and at the time, McCain had taken the position of wanting to have publicly financed elections. Now, his reasoning was because Obama was kicking his ass left and right in campaign donations. But remember, it was Obama who was like, no, let's leave that spigot open. And then by, I think, what was it, by the time that Mitt Romney was running against Obama in 2012, now we have the Citizens United thing.
Yeah.
So that was an unintended consequence of allowing the corporations to get in. And now, to your point, we're not going to be talking about homelessness now, right? Because the only thing that we're interested in is what the corporate donors are interested in.
Right.
So your kitchen table politics.
I'm sorry.
Absolutely. Your kitchen table politics aren't important to them. So unless we curb that piece of it, we're probably never going to get back to, what's important to we the people.
Well,
And we can thank Obama for that partially.
so, what I look at is nobody was talking about homelessness. And then Trump comes through and does an executive order and criminalizes homelessness, and
Mm-hmm.
not just like living on the street, but homelessness, right?
Mm-hmm.
You cannot be homeless. If you are, you're going to be put into a facility. Then he's sending the military in, to these different cities to round people up. You don't hear Democrats saying, what the hell, those are citizens. Nobody's saying anything because they don't care about social programs anymore. That's not their top priority anymore. And supposedly that's who they were.
Yeah, because you have your tech bros and APAC, and they donate to both sides.
Yeah. And
So
that kind of
either way.
brings me to the civil liberties and policing, right? So when they're supporting expanding surveillance, predictive policing, anti-protest laws, and the thing is, go into the feckless hand wringing, right? They don't do anything about it, but if pressed, to answer to it, it's, oh my God, I know it's going to be so bad, and it's so terrible that that's going to happen, but they aren't going to do anything about it. They just allow it to go on a river. If they treat national security as untouchable, if they oppose whistleblowers or global accountability mechanisms, which we've seen some of this, especially when the UN was getting involved, right? You had some Dems that were in agreement with what was happening. Hi, Andrea. Thanks for being here. Andrea's talking about South Park episodes.
Sometimes they're more accurate than the news.
Yes, they're spot on. Leon says Obama was placed in the position to win. China, Russia, and the world knew about the banking AAA issue and didn't want an Anglo running the country. Remember, women voted for Hillary. Okay. Now, social policy and religion. If they use faith-based language in their legislation, if they hesitate to challenge Christian nationalist narratives, and oh boy, we see that. If they support school choice, all of those things, we see those, and this is probably a MAGA-leaning Dem. If they support the tough on crime bills or longer sentences, if they extend Reagan and Clinton carceral frameworks, if they're all for state control, they're MAGA aligned, right? If they accept mass incarceration as public safety. And again, we see the Overton window because laying it out like this, that these are the Heritage Foundation tenets, we can see how many Dems are following along with this.
Right. Mm-hmm.
If they criticize independent journalists as irresponsible, if they promote algorithmic censorship for safety, right? If they partner with corporate media to define what is the truth or what is a woman, right? Remember that whole debacle? Hi, Auntie. Auntie's here, sliding in late. Better late than never. Thank you, Auntie.
Because it's like they want to toe this line as opposed to going into real economic and social populism.
Right.
Which we've already seen, polls better on both sides of the aisle than any of this nonsense that they're trying to do now. But they keep trying to run hard to the right to be able to bring in conservative white men and women, which they're never going to get. So instead of trying to get them, they should be, really going after the guy who's not voting because he's given up on whether or not America really has anything for him or her. And there's more of them out there than there are the folks who are voting, in these ways that are just not productive.
Right. So, and then labor and inequality. avoids confronting corporate monopolies. Well, that's where they're getting all their money, right? Accepts gig economy precarity as innovative and blocks unionizing efforts quietly,
Well, and
right?
who started the gig economy?
Which one was that?
That was under Obama.
Ah,
He padded his unemployment numbers with gig economy jobs, so it could look like he had a better um, unemployment percentage than he actually did.
so some behavioral markers to look for, just kind of generalizing these things, right? Like speaks like an activist and governs like a lobbyist. We see that often because the
Hmm.
lobbyists have the money. So like saying we have to protect democracy. This election is about democracy. And then they do things like vote for surveillance, right? If they have moral framing over any sort of material justice, right? Using the language of values and all these things to justify austerity or intervention, and then nothing happens. Like they're all talk, which kind of plays into the next one, right? Performs diversity and maintains hierarchy. So they
Hmm.
want symbolic inclusion and representation, but they won't pay reparations. Now, will they? They won't. They resist wholeheartedly redistributive policy of any kind. So inclusion is only inclusion as a performance, right?
Well,
And
you bring
Heritage
up something.
mastered this. I'm sorry,
I'm
what?
sorry. No, no, I'm sorry. Can continue.
Well, I was going to say Heritage mastered this. If you look through Heritage documents, they talk about the optics of fairness, the optics of fairness. And it seems like a lot of Democrats utilize that. And then they go around defending institutions instead of people. They're equating criticism of the government, or specifically the Democratic Party, especially the elites, with some sort of disloyalty. And then they give those talking points to people on the internet. So if you have any sort of criticism for a party, even when you're a member of, you're automatically disloyal. So you could be a card carrying Democrat and say, "Hey, Kamala, I need to know what's your platform? What policies are you going to do?" Like you're just going around nothing burger. You're not talking about it. You're not answering questions. And then you get attacked by other Dems just for pointing something out or asking questions. You know, I can't tell you how many times, and Adrian will say the same things, that we're talking to people online and we get accused of being a Trumper or a MAGA, or get accused of being a Dem, a liberal, a libtard, like simply because we're asking questions of what's going
Right.
on.
Exactly.
You get
Exactly.
accused of being both sides of everything.
And something just came to mind. Um, just listening to you speak. So the pivotal part of this whole process was, in my opinion, okay, this is Adrian's opinion. The pivotal part of this whole process was the election of Nixon, because again, he specifically ran against all the things that came out of the Kerner Commission.
Mm-hmm.
But then I'm thinking to myself, um, how many Democratic administrations have we had since then that could have just circled back around and taken up some of the policy proposals of the Kerner Commission,
Mm-hmm.
and they didn't. You know, it's not as if this information isn't out there. It had big
Mm-hmm.
sweeping policy changes, and uh, program recommendations that we just didn't do.
They just
And
didn't.
Leon, I see you. I see you, Leon. I appreciate that. And that's exactly what I'm talking about.
Yeah. So Kevin says, all you are reading, Maggie, are steps to implementing the New World Order, and you can trace all this back to England and the Crown and Rome. And these are things I have talked about on this channel.
Yep,
So I
sure
wholeheartedly
have.
agree with what you're saying. And
Hmm.
again, we're going to be talking about Agenda 2030 in an upcoming show, which is a lot about the New World Order. That's what a lot of this is about. And Leon brings up that by by including gig jobs in employment, Obama was able to say that Black male employment is up 10% by including gig jobs. So, this is the point, and I would say we can either call them MAGA Dems or we can just call them Blue MAGA, because at this point they're not even Dems, they're just Blue MAGAs, because they're only Democratic by aesthetics.
So you're being corralled by either oligarchs or corporatists.
Which sometimes are the same people.
They're the same thing,
Yeah.
That's why you need a viable third party.
Yeah. So some examples of a Blue MAGA or a MAGA Dem would be voting for expanded Patriot Act powers under like a counterterrorism pretext. And, we just had a terrorist who beheaded Americans be invited into the White House to hang out. But
shout out to Syria.
Yeah, approving military budgets that exceed, previous levels, and where we at now, $1 trillion military budget.
Yeah.
Supporting AI surveillance or pre-crime, remaining silent on Project 2025 because corporate donors back both camps there. So, there was a lot of talk about Project 2025 when the election was going on, but now nobody's saying a word when it's being implemented, right?
So, Maggie, we have those flock cameras here where we live, right? Did you know that was voted on unanimously by our city council?
I'm not surprised.
Yeah, unanimously. So, public surveillance at all times, reading your license plates and things like that. Voted on by both. Yeah, voted on by both the Democrats and Republicans of our local city council. And I reached out to one of the city councilmen because I know him personally. I'm like, what were you thinking? But it's always sold as, well, crime, and if those hoodlums over there shoot, we want to know where the shot's coming from. Well, they didn't explain to you that, oh, by the way, we're going to be reading your license or your license plates everywhere you go, and be able to track your movements and see how many times you went into this neighborhood where you go at all times,
what houses you went by,
right,
what areas you've been in. So yeah. And then another Blue MAGA or MAGA Dem tendency is using identity politics as cover for carceral policy, like you just brought up. So that was a great segue right into that, and a better explanation than I had. So, a Democrat is a MAGA when they uphold corporate dominance, militarism, and surveillance. They frame dissent as disorder. They protect institutions instead of the people that they serve. And they govern from those sort of heritage talking points. They just change it to liberal language. So again, with the Overton window moving, you can see that a lot of the Democrats are following this.
Leon, I see your comment, and that's exactly what's going on with 2030.
Yeah, the federal ID chip.
Yeah, we're worried about it. Trust me. It's, it's coming.
And, one of the people that we've already talked about several times is Bill Clinton. If you look at Bill Clinton, he is Blue MAGA. Like everything that he did, he said he was Democrat. He was elected as a Democrat president, but everything he did aligned with heritage.
Well, he was the tip of the spear for the neoliberal party.
Yeah.
For neoliberalism, right? Because before him, the candidate before him was Michael Dukakis. Weird looking short guy with really bushy eyebrows. That's what I remember about him. Right? You know what I'm saying? So, and he was a big tent, let's let Jesse Jackson get up here and speak kind of guy, right? I'm not saying you shouldn't, but I'm saying it was a big tent party at that time. And when Clinton and them came in, we squashing all of that. I mean, again, he's got scandals as a governor, right? He's virtue signaling with the Stone Mountain, Georgia thing. He's married to a Goldwater girl, right? She was a surrogate of Barry Goldwater back in the civil rights era, right? So they are not the same. He's
Yeah.
the tip of the spear for where we are right now.
Yeah. He laid a lot of groundwork. He had the welfare reform in 1996.
Mm-hmm.
He had the
Three
budget
strikes laws.
right, that was cutting domestic programs and increasing corporate tax incentives, right?
Mm-hmm.
The core of Reaganomics he brought back to balance the budget, right? He funded new police, expanded prisons, codified the three strike sentencing, institutionalized mass incarceration. He continued Reagan's war on drugs, moved into the super predator panic, right? The Gramm-Leach-Billy Act repealed Glass-Steagall's wall between investment and commercial banking. So he's doing a lot for the oligarchs because he is one. He did the
Mm-hmm.
Commodity Futures Modernization Act, which kept derivatives largely unregulated. He did
Thank
the
you,
North
Leon.
American
NAFTA.
that's what I was getting ready to say.
Yep.
Exported industrial jobs, hollowing U.S. manufacturing, working class displacement, right? And that's the resentment that MAGA then later weaponized, right? The 1996 Illegal Immigration Reform and Immigration Responsibility Act, surveillance and security, he's on that. The 1996 Anti-Terrorism and Effective Death Penalty Act widened federal surveillance and limited habeas corpus appeals. That led into Bush's Patriot Act and Trump's DHS tactics. They built on Clinton's foundation there. It seems like these MAGA Dems, the blue MAGA, want to seem like they are tough, but morally superior and market friendly, and they just don't do anything. This is why I say two wings, same bird, because they don't do anything to stop it. In fact, they do things that support it and keep it moving forward.
Yeah, didn't we lose Miranda rights under Biden?
Yes. And it was also under Biden where the Supreme Court ruled that police their job is not to protect people, but to protect property.
Right.
That's why they took to serve and protect off of their cars, guys, because they were told by the Supreme Court their job is not to protect people, but to protect property.
Which brings us all the way back around, full circle with the whole idea of policing, because what were police originally for?
Right. They were the slave patrols.
Right. So protect the property.
Yeah. So something I had a question about, and I'm wondering what you're thinking, that we've gone through all this criterion, how things have moved, the Congressional Black Caucus is always seen as the most progressive or the most supportive of the people on the ground, the most connected to the general populace. But in looking at, again, we're talking about, your actions are different than your words. What are your thoughts on the Congressional Black Caucus as it relates to the actions rather than the appearance of what's happening?
They are the prototype for feckless hand-wringing. I think that the Democrats might have learned some of it from them. Again, all you have to do is look at Hakeem Jeffries' leadership. And also a lot of your Congressional Black Caucus leaders were groomed from high school and early college days by AIPAC.
Wasn't Obama? Didn't we read that somewhere?
I thought I did, but I don't feel, and me, if I don't feel confident in saying something, I'm not, so
that's just a thought.
so there's some of that, but we do know that we do know that uh, that they are finding future black leadership, and they are grooming them. APAC specifically is grooming them, before they get into these positions of power. Um, uh, you would think that if you were the congressperson for one of the worst um, uh, economic, or for one of the worst districts economically in the United States, that you might be for redistributive uh, policies, and you might fight harder for the folks in your district. But that's not Jim Clyburn. You know, he he's vociferously against reparations.
Mm-hmm.
And not that he doesn't think that, or at least not that he doesn't say that we should get reparations, but he surely isn't doing anything to put forth any effort there. And also, if you look at the charter for the Congressional Black Caucus, it says that they are the conscience of the Congress, whatever that means. But if you go into looking at the charter for the Hispanic caucus or the Asian caucus, they say that they are there to do things for Hispanic and Asian people.
Well,
But
you
you
know
don't
what
get
I
that.
just thought of when you said they're the conscience is, so they're Jiminy Cricket. So
Yeah,
they have their umbrellas, and they sing and they whisper in people's ears and don't
yeah,
actually do
they don't
anything.
do anything.
I
No.
do want to say that Marcus is here. Thank you for being here, Marcus. He is glad to see that you're alive, Adrian. And Leon says, Congressional Black Caucus, aka Black Bourgeoisie or Boule, are just haters because we don't look up to them. The two Khazarian brothers, that's a good one, Leon, have their hands all in that pot.
And I don't know what Marcus is talking about. He knows I'm alive.
Oh, he could be talking about somebody in the chat. He just said he's alive, so I assumed it was
Okay.
you. He could be talking about somebody else. Okay, so we've kind of gotten to the end. I think we have explained the rise of MAGA and how we've gotten to where we are. And anybody who thinks that Project 2025 is a nothing burger and that Heritage is a nothing burger, and that Trump never heard of them and all that kind of stuff, understands that yes, absolutely, that's what's happening. And if you went into Trump's election cycle thinking that Trump would never lie to you, I think you got to think again. Every politician lies to get elected. Every single one. There is no honest politician. So hopefully nobody's falling for that again. Oh, okay. Marcus says he's talking about you.
Mm-hmm. I know what you're talking about.
Okay. So the next thing we're going to go into is Agenda 2030, which comes out of the UN. And I wanted to do it a little bit different, and Adrian is game, so I appreciate that so much. We watched a documentary recently that's talking about Agenda 2030 and what it's based on, and how corporations are benefiting and these kind of things. And Agenda 2030 was going to be the next thing that we get into. So in watching that documentary, it was interesting. So we're going to kind of review this documentary and add information that we may know. There may be things that we disagree with. There may be things that we agree with. There may be things that Adrian and I disagree with each other about. But we thought it would be interesting to have that conversation. Then, of course, the live tribe, best live tribe on YouTube, and then really start getting into the tinfoil hat, and some more deeper conspiracies that we are pretty sure are happening beyond Agenda 2030. So that one should be pretty exciting.
Yeah.
Oh, Leon says, no, it's not a good one. Their last names are Khazarian. Who is that? The Khazarian brothers? I was thinking, you know what I was thinking, Ashkenazi. That's what I was thinking.
Yeah.
I
Yeah,
didn't know that.
I'm waiting for him to give a little bit more context there because I'm drawing a blank. So
Yeah, who are the two brothers that are Khazarian? Yeah, because I immediately went Ashkenazi.
yeah,
And I don't want to have to play my disclaimer during this show. I have to play it enough. So Kevin agrees, don't expect politicians to save you from politics. Right. And don't expect businessmen to save you from poverty. They benefit from
yeah,
your poverty.
yeah.
Okay, so that should be next weekend's show. Will be about Agenda 2030, getting into the tinfoil hat, those kind of things. But this coming Wednesday, we'll be continuing on with the Book of Knowledge, the Keys of Enoch. There are a total of 319, no, there are 3 different sections, 1, 2, 3. The final key is 3-1-9, and I think this coming Wednesday is 3-0-8. So we've gone through a lot, and we're coming close to the end, and then we'll kind of wrap up, our thoughts and feelers on, on that book. And then we're going to move into mixing it up a little bit. I'm probably going to be doing 2 books at a time, doing a lot more tinfoil hat, because there's just so much going on and so many conspiracy theories that we're finding out are true. So we're going to be getting back into that on our Pivot Point Wednesdays coming up. Adrian, do you have any final words for people?
I don't. Just know that even with the different stuff that we talked about today, I'm like at page 3 out of like 19. And
You got a bunch more. Hey, we got to the end of my
yeah,
notes.
it's a ton, and again, when we're talking about make America great again, what we're literally doing is having to take a deep dive into what is America and who are Americans and
Mm.
what does this mean. So you almost have to. I mean, like, I think we're being kind in just looking at the last 50 years, 55 years.
Okay, so
Really,
why don't
this
we do
is
this? Folks in
yeah.
the chat, do you want us to do a part 3 next Sunday and then save Agenda 2030 for the following Sunday? If that's what you would like to do, I am down for that. If Adrian's down for that, put a 1 in the chat if you are ready for part 3 next weekend, where we can go a little deeper. And if you're going to go that far back in history, I know my tinfoil hat's going to be on. Trey.
Well, and I'm not even saying that my notes take us all that far back. I mean, I'm just saying that within the last 55 years, there's enough information here to really have a part 3. But really uh, to dissect this, you have to investigate the whole of the history of the United States, or at least the last 160 years.
Yeah.
So everything post slavery. How do we get here? How did we have the rise of the robber barons? And all these old money names and things like that. I mean, and to Kevin's point, yeah, we'd have to go back to the crown. So I mean, it really gets deep, 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 deep.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know that we have time to go all the way back to the
No, we don't. We
Plantagenets,
don't. No.
Cathars.
No,
Because
we
I'm
don't.
all about going back to, year 1 after, literally year 1 after the death of Jesus of Nazareth and the power grabs that started happening. Like, it all, to me, that's where it started, was the Roman
Well,
power grabs. So we could go back a long, long ways.
I mean, think about this. We're talking about single payer healthcare. Well, that if we really want to understand why we don't have it, we have to go back to the turn of the 19th century. just to really start to drill down into that. So, even that's over 100 years ago, just
Mm-hmm.
to have a conversation about what we believe to be a very modern topic, but it's not. We've been wrestling with this for a long time. People talk about reparations, like black folks just started talking about it. No, we've been wrestling with that since 1890 in this country.
Mm-hmm.
So anyway, that's all I got. But this was fun.
Okay, well, let's go ahead and do a part 3 next weekend, and then we'll get into Agenda 2030, once we've fully explored this. So, we've fully fleshed out MAGA Heritage, Project 2025, and, then we can go into Agenda 2030, because that is definitely something to be looking at as well,
Hmm.
because it is couched as very liberal and environment friendly and all that kind of stuff. So this is a great example of couching these policies into the rhetoric
Hmm.
of the liberal.
Yeah,
All right.
environmentally friendly. See, also, you can't travel out of state anymore.
Right. You'll have nothing and you'll like it.
Yes, exactly.
All right, so we'll do part 3 next Sunday. This Wednesday, we'll continue with the Book of Knowledge, the Keys of Enoch. I appreciate everybody being here. Thank you, Adrian, for being here.
Absolutely.
And I am going to show you guys a picture of my dog. Please like the video if you haven't already. It really helps the algorithm to know what kind of things you like. Share where you think it's appropriate, especially to someone who you think needs to hear it. And last, don't forget to subscribe if you haven't already, especially if you want to break down complex concepts that make the esoteric not so teric, helping you on your journey to become your most authentic self. Let's uncover the universe together. And remember, think like you mean it, and know that Earth wants you here.